evening, and welcome to the fourth evening of the Creative Communities Culture Conference. This conference is presented by the Culture Alliance in the heart of Georgian Bay with the support of Rogers TV. My name is Chantal Gagnon. I am the Simcoe County Regional Development Advisor for the Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism, and Culture Industries, and I'll be your moderator for this evening. As mentioned, this conference is hosted by the Culture Alliance in the heart of Georgian Bay, which represent the Beausoleil First Nation, the towns of Midland and Penetanguishene, and the townships of Tay and Tiny. We recognize that the region represented by the Culture Alliance is located on land, which is a traditional and treaty territory of the Chippewas of Lake Huron and Lake Simcoe, now known as the Chippewa Tri-Council, which comprises Beausoleil First Nation, Rama First Nation, and the Georgina Island First Nation. This territory is within the Pre-Confederation Treaty 5, Treaty 16, and Treaty 18, and included within the Williams Treaties of 1923. We also recognize that the region is located on land which was once the territory of the Huron-Wendat, and that our communities are home to many citizens of the Métis Nation of Ontario and to a large and diverse community of Indigenous peoples. We are grateful to the sponsor of this conference. The sponsors for this evening are the Midland Public Library and Grant Thornton. We express our thanks to them for making this program possible. We also express our gratitude to Simcoe County Tourism for their conference sponsorship and to Rogers TV for their technical support. The theme of this conference is Obstacles and Opportunities, Finding the Path to Success. The topic of this evening's session is Solving the Money Problem, Accessing Sources of Financial Support. Money has always been a problem for the creative economy. How do talented artists, artisans, musicians, and performers make the leap from hobby to career, from amateur to professional, from the small shop to broader markets, and from the small stage to the big stage? How do libraries, museums, theaters, and performance venues keep the door open? Where can they find funding opportunities? So this evening features three special panelists. Avril Helbig, who is a veteran development specialist. Hello, Avril. We also have David Bernard, who is a senior program advisor for the Canada Arts Presentation Fund of Canadian Heritage. Hi, David. And Monica Akala from Business and Arts, who is specialized in fundraising and sponsorship. Hi, Monica. Each of our three panelists will speak for about 5 minutes to introduce our topic. Then I'll moderate a discussion with them about issues that arise from their presentations as we overcome the obstacle and discover the opportunities in accessing sources of financial support. At 8 p.m., we will conclude our panel discussion and the eyes will open so that we can bring all of you in the conversation. In the second hour, we hope that you and other audience members will ask questions and comments so that we undoubtedly identify other obstacles and challenges and perhaps also discover more opportunities in financing. Throughout that time, our three panelists will be standing by to engage with you. So let's get started. I'll call on each of our panelists to make their 5-minute opening presentation on the theme of this evening: Solving the Money Problem, Accessing Sources of Financial Support. Our first speaker is Avril Helbig. Avril is a development specialist with over 30 years of experience creating and launching initiatives for private, not-for-profit, and charitable organizations. She has experience with integrated sponsorship campaigns that combine banks, governments, and private corporate sponsorship. Welcome to our discussion, Avril.
Thank you. Thanks very much. In thinking about what I was going to talk about today, I thought that I could introduce myself a little bit and give you a little bit of my own history. I come from a performance background, so if I'm looking at the topic of tonight's discussion, I'm very familiar with this question of how to make the leap in early years, how to develop your career to the point where you can be successful and sustainable in of yourself. And then So personally, I moved from performer to manager and agent to the record industry to developing my own agency and management organization and involving myself in touring overseas and then over across North America as well, turning around to consulting and working with venues and larger organizations around 2005. And that's what I've done ever since. So right now my consulting practice is everything from individual performers all the way through to huge events and organizations, and then also some for-profit companies and organizations that have their own special perspective on what funding means. So, I mean, one of the things I'd like to do is just introduce some large-scale topics from the funding point of view. And I'm hoping that in the second hour, when we get the chance to field questions and hear what people are interested in, that we can go more into the details of what it's like to go through the process of applying or determining whether you want to do that and really get into the nitty-gritty at that point. So, but I think as a first step, what I see when people are considering funding and the thought process for individuals as well as organizations, there's some themes that come up over and over again. So the first question that they have to sort of develop for themselves and answer for themselves is around identity. Who are you? What do you do? What are your strengths? Where are you at in your career? And second to that, who do you work with? Who could you potentially work with? And who do you represent? So identity in terms of funding is key to know what source you want to approach and where you want to go. Then there's reasons to apply for funding. Most people have a project coming up next week that they need money for right away. And so unfortunately, people like me often hear from organizations and artists who have a tremendous need immediately for funding. Sadly, that doesn't work that way. It's either for funding for a project or the need to just continue to evolve or grow as an artist and an organization. Fair enough, that's great. And then the rationale for why to seek funding is often like, do we need it now? Do we deserve it? Or have we reached a certain point with our career? Do we have certain differentiation that makes us different from other people? And the mentality around this, once people and organizations start to think about this is, all right, let's do it. Let's go. Let's just jump right into it. And unfortunately, when you're considering funding, there are a lot of steps that really advantage you in doing that you might not know about it. These include being aware of where funding comes from, highlighting fund deadlines, knowing the program officers who are front lines and dealing with that and consulting with them and considering partnerships. So that said, I just wanted to state the obvious for people in terms of funding and maybe go over some funding sources, just sort of list what is out there and what has emerged sort of in the ecology and the landscape for me as a professional over the last little while. So in terms of funding source levels, of course, at the federal, for creatives, there are many different sources, but we're talking about the Canada Council, the Department of Canadian Heritage, we're talking about Factor, we're talking about Radio Star Maker for frontline professionals, and there are various other sources for people who aren't in live performing arts. But I'm going to focus specifically on performing arts and organizations. But there are also non-sectoral federal sources of funding, like various ministries intersect with arts and culture in various ways. You can get money for export, and we'll go into that later, but export is much bigger than just taking yourself to a different country and promoting your product. You can get money for small businesses. You can get money for skills development, all from different ministries. And then there's also other federal sources that are association flow-through funding. That means that you might not think of them as funders, but they're associations that represent the sector, and they often have funding to apply to certain situations, as like Capicoa and things like that. Provincial level, Ontario Arts Council, Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism and Culture, which is you, Chantal. Ontario Creates, Ontario Trillium Foundation. There's non-sectoral at the provincial level too. You can access funds from OLG, or regional development agencies. And then there's local. There's Toronto Arts Council, regional arts councils. For me, Toronto is the main one, municipal councils and foundations. So there are so many sources that identifying who you are, what you need, and where you're going to go to are really super important. I know that I'm talking, as usual, way more than I should, so I'm just going to give you some very quick notes on what I think the emerging directions that I've seen in the last little while are and have been for my clients. So export, and especially pre-COVID, became very, very high on people's, top of mind for people as the Creative Canada framework developed by Heritage was introduced. And that policy, which evolved from a previous policy from Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade years ago, became replaced by this new one. There's a new emphasis on BIPOC organizations and issues, and a new anti-racism secretariat. There's a new awareness of Indigenous, both creatives and community and operations issues, and there's a new awareness of digital strategies and projects as well. In addition to that, there's a new emphasis on Black entrepreneurship, which was just introduced at the federal level just a little while ago. So in terms of trends, there's a convergence of export marketing. There's an awareness of the importance of elevating certain underrepresented voices, which we have been in guidelines for a very long time, but are sort of coming into the fore in terms of people really working that into their activities and their lives and their stance. And then there's an expansion to the creative economy. So things that weren't necessarily considered like very fundable in terms of genres or modes of expression are coming into the forefront now. So those are all things that I'd love to apply to our discussion moving forward, and I will stop taking up time now.
Thank you. Our second panelist this evening is David Bernard. David is Senior Program Advisor for the Canada Arts Presentation Fund of the Department of Canadian Heritage in the region of Ontario. Your turn, David. I think you're muted.
Thank you, Chantal. We'll start again. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking me. I grew up in the Medani County on the 6th concession. Our address was R1 Midland, and my phone exchange was Moonstone. So it's a pleasure to be speaking with folks that I know are based in that area, because I know it well. I'm speaking to you from the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples here in Toronto, Takaranto. And nice to hear the acknowledgement off the top, because I think that's an important thing to do. How do you talk about something as big as Canadian heritage? I'm not sure, but I will attempt to do it. I'm going to put my timer on so that I don't overdo it. The Department of Canadian Heritage was created by Kim Campbell back in 1994, and it has evolved and grown, shrunk in various ways over the years. Essentially, it's intended to look at five specific areas of need and sector. So they are creative, arts and culture, heritage and celebration, sport, diversity and inclusion, and official languages. And the department consists of approximately 37 programs at this time. And the easiest way to summarize this is that there are programs which are delivered from what we call headquarters. So that is teams that are based in Gatineau. And then there are 8 programs which are delivered through regional offices. And I'm based in the Toronto regional office serving Ontario. There are 5 regions in total in the way the country's been divided up. So within those programs, we see that a number are focused on arts and culture, and that includes building communities through arts and heritage, the Canada Arts Presentation Fund, Celebrate Canada, Then there is one which focuses on the heritage sector, and that is the Museums Assistance Program. And there is one which focuses on infrastructure, and that is the Canada Cultural Spaces Fund. And the final program, which covers both infrastructure, culture, arts, and so on, is the official languages. The newest program is the Multiculturalism Program, which is divided into two. There is community support, multiculturalism, and anti-racism initiatives. We love using acronyms in government, and so that program is known as CSMAR. So I had to stop to think, what does that stand for? And now the newest program to be added to the portfolio is called the Anti-Racism Action Plan, which Avril referred to as this is focused on supporting Black entrepreneurship, as well as other things. I think what would be most helpful, just in the quick time that we have here, is to understand that Avril mentioned that, get to know your advisor. That's such an important thing. So one of the things that I strongly advise is don't be afraid to contact your regional office and get to know people there, learn about some of the different ways that the programs are delivered, what their priorities are, because each program has its own set of individual priorities, and there's overreaching priorities related to the province as well as for the government itself. It is important to consult with us because we work on timelines which you can't be thinking about a project and thinking that we might fund you in a month or two. It's just our timelines are quite long. The program that I work for, which is the Canada Arts Presentation Fund, we are looking often at an 18-month timeline before the funding that we are providing you with will relate to something you do 18 months from now. I think what I would like to now speak about are some of the trends that I see occurring in our funding mechanisms. For a long time, we have seen the relationship with Indigenous communities and organizations, the relationship with Black-led and other racialized-led organizations, the relationship with LGBTQ+, relationship with those who are differently abled. They have been talked about, but unfortunately, due to COVID perhaps, and also looking at just the Black Lives Matter movement, it has brought to the fore the need for the Department of Canadian Heritage to take seriously the nature of equity. And there is a very strong internal conversation, which is addressing, okay, what do we need to do and how do we change things? And my prediction is that we'll soon see an outward focus towards, okay, for the programs that exist, how can they do a better job of addressing these priorities? And perhaps there'll be new developments. We now have an Indigenous Language Act, and there is soon to be an office opening with a commissioner and directors. And I think from that, you will see that there'll be a number of new funds created. I guess in summary, I'm going to reemphasize, it's important to build a relationship with those people who work in Canadian heritage who can support your endeavors. And many of us come from the sector ourselves. My background is in broadcast journalism, and I also worked in event production. So I bring that to the table, and I would say that we're strongly committed to your success and helping your projects to be the best they can. I'll end on that note.
That's great, David. Thank you. Our third panelist this evening is Monica Akala. Monica has a background in arts advocacy and education that eventually branched into sponsorship and fundraising during her time at Business and Arts. It is there that she manages the Toronto Arts Fest program. So Monica, please.
Yeah, hello. As you said, I've worked at Business and Arts, and before that, previously to managing the Toronto program, I worked with Ontario Mentorship Program. So I worked with a lot of Northern Ontario communities and remote communities as well. And I love that Avril and David both talked about partnerships and growing communities tonight, because that's what I like to focus on too in terms of sponsorships. It's always largely about forming partnerships and forming relationships with your community as well, especially now more than ever in the time of COVID, when we don't know when we'll be able to ever return to a normal. And most likely there won't be a normal as we know it anymore. So what I'd like to focus on largely tonight is alternative fundraising from what we've normally seen. So based off of my experiences at Business and Arts, I've been fortunate enough to partake on a number of webinars that we've been able to put on. One of which I got to learn about the idea of tiered and ticketed fundraising for your events. So that largely allows you to engage with your community. If someone wants to have just an access of watching a live stream, they're able to participate at that just basic level. But then thinking about what you can do for sponsorships and your audience who wants to engage with you more, because a lot of people do in times like these. So just thinking outside the box and what you can do for that. So one example that I wanted to showcase and highlight, I'll share my screen. I had it prepared in advance. So the one example that I wanted to highlight was a recent webinar that we were fortunate enough to share. And the example that I wanted to highlight tonight was from the webinar that we had, Are Canadians Ready to Return to the Arts? So this is highlighting what I said before, if there will ever be a normal again for us. So what this webinar did was it focused on surveying the climate of what arts goers and arts participants are feeling and thinking. And it focused on Canada nationwide, so it looked at multiple communities. So keep that in mind as you go through. But if you do watch this webinar, I strongly encourage you to watch Wesley Colford's example of Highland Theatre and their plan on what they did for tiered ticketing. It was extremely successful at Highland Theatre in Cape Breton. And it's something that's applicable to a lot of organizations, because like Avril and David mentioned as well, when you're forming relationships and partnerships, I don't believe they should only be with your audience and your stakeholders and your sponsors as well, but also looking inward and figuring out how you can focus and build more strength, or focus and strengthen relationships with your existing board. Because a lot of the time, I'm not sure about our audience tonight, but for me personally, I work with a lot of organizations that have minimal amounts of staff or are largely volunteer run. And I know that tonight there are a lot of individual artists watching as well. So what I wanted to focus on as well was more approachable fundraising for people like that who don't have staff that they can apply and focus on specifically. So something that's more approachable for you as an individual. And another example that I wanted to highlight was, if you are a nonprofit, I know a lot of you have heard about Canada Helps, but I strongly encourage you to sign up with Tiltify as well. So Tiltify is another different website, and what it does is it allows you to engage with a lot of people who may want to fundraise for your organization. So scrolling down, you can see that they feature a lot of charities and nonprofits. These ones are focused from the US, but Tiltify is really amazing because it does focus internationally. So Canadian organizations are featured as well there. And all you need to sign up there would be a charitable number. Tiltify leads me into focusing on Twitch. So I know a lot of nonprofits and individual artists are looking to live stream now. Many have focused on Facebook and YouTube, which are something that you can fundraise through Tiltify. So Tiltify lets you put a campaign that goes cross-platform. So that means you can fundraise to the same campaign, whether you're creating content on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram, even on TikTok. And it was really cool because I was watching the presentation on Tuesday night and hearing Gavin Reynolds speak to the fundraising initiatives on Facebook. This is something that lends itself to that so well, especially on reaching different audience members, because that's what you see these days in social media, is so many different ages on so many different platforms. So if you're a nonprofit, I definitely encourage you to sign up with Tiltify so you can reach those multiple audiences, no matter what content you're putting on what resource. And that leads me going back to Twitch, which is an amazing website. I find it to be a little more accessible and interactive than YouTube or Facebook. Mm-hmm. So you can create a platform on there or an account, and as soon as you start streaming more regularly, it lets you set up a direct income from there. So people who watch and enjoy your streams can subscribe to you for a cost per month, similar to Patreon, but a little different. If you're not used to Patreon, that's where people can just choose to give you money per month if you're an individual artist or anyone of that sort. But I definitely encourage anyone who's looking into creating live performances on Twitch. And if you're not familiar with it, it started as a video game streaming website, but scrolling down, I just clicked the music tab here. So you can see there's even harpists, people singing. There's a lot of creative streams on it. There's a lot of people who do artwork as well. People do face paint and body paint, anything of the sort. There's people who would like to watch that and just see those creative streams happening on Twitch. And if you're using Twitch or Tiltify to reach out and do more fundraising and wet your toes in that, I really encourage you to listen to my friend Alyssa's podcast. So Alyssa is actually the charity partnership manager at Twitch, and she created a podcast called Influencer Fundraising, where she really just gets into the top level for anyone not used to working with influencers. And it just breaks it down in a really approachable step-by-step method. So focusing on community building, and she really emphasizes the focus on community management. So it ties directly back to David and Avril talking about community building and relationship and sponsorship building. And definitely to anyone watching, I do encourage you to reach out and just kind of attempt to branch your social media platforms or anything that you're doing online. Document anything, because it helps build you up and let people know what you're doing. But then also at that same time of creating more awareness, it's a showcase and a portfolio of your work as well. So if you find a sponsor who you think you might be a good fit working with, or if you see an artist that you'd love to collaborate, it's definitely worth it to reach out. That just comes more to my background with working in sponsorships at Business and Arts. I've seen this year a lot of organizations have not focused on traditional sponsors, but a lot more have found media sponsor partnerships. So a lot have focused on Curiosity, Blog.to, something like that to generate awareness, especially with income coming from sources like Instagram shops and stuff like that as well. I didn't want to take up too much time, but if anyone wants to get into a little more specific questions, I'd be happy to help with that, whether it's digital fundraising or anything of the sort for sponsorships. But just wanted to get back to our main discussion as well. I feel like it's coming to a theme of just relationship building and sponsorships, helping us all feel a little less alone in times of COVID.
That's great. Thank you, Monica. Now that we've heard from our three panelists, let's discuss our topic further, solving the money problem, accessing sources of financial support. I just wanted you to remember that at 8 p.m. we'll conclude our discussion with the panelists, and then it'll be your time to speak. So in the meantime, make notes or take notes of your question, and we'll come back at 8 o'clock and we can hash out all of your questions. Coming back to you guys, you heard anything from your co-panelists that you wanted to maybe pick up and highlight further or discuss in more detail?
Yeah, I can pick up a theme here if you don't mind me.
Yeah, go ahead.
First, I love the new ideas that Monica is talking about. Look at the new ideas. They're new to me. My 14-year-olds laugh at me because they think I'm ridiculously out of touch, right? But, you know, AOC on Twitch and stuff like that just really made huge difference to their lives. So I get that. But there's this thing about the democratization of attention in terms of what social media brings to artists and creatives, and that is the burden of expertise, right? And you know, we're all talking at a fairly high level about what it takes to get money, and you can make a career out of it. You know, you can make a career out of this in many different ways, and you can become an expert at it. But the truth is, to be an expert at everything you need to be in order to be an artist and to get money is a burden. And it's a second full-time job outside of your first full-time portfolio in terms of being creative and focusing on that. So I just wanted to put that on the table. And I think in terms of accessing funding, that's quite the obstacle, not only from the social media point of view, but from the point of view of funding. Just getting the level of information that you need is difficult. And being the expert that you need to be in these arenas is difficult. So what are the strategies that people can use to, overcome that? I mean, I think that the relationship building is an important one, because obviously, like David said, you can mainline information about any of these sources of funding by speaking directly to the people who are handling it. And that's important. And that is your right. And that is in fact, the best way to understand a situation is to get that firsthand information, Take some time, but it's a good thing. Everyone should feel like they have that opportunity available to them, no matter what the stage of their career they're at, right? Am I right? Or David, do you just not want to get 100 phone calls tomorrow?
No, I would love it if I got 100 phone calls. A really important point, because one of the things that Avril mentioned is how many different sources there are. And how does one, because I've been working at Canadian Heritage for 13 years, and I feel like I'm maybe only in the last year and a half really come to appreciate the breadth of what's available and how it works, more importantly. Yeah. And one thing that I wanted to add, just for everyone's sake who's listening and watching this, is that the culture changes from one agency to one organization. There's quite the objectives, the goals of certain funds, especially if you're an organization that's applying to multiple sources to support your festival or your series presentation or your library or whatever it might be, you do have to understand that there'll be nuances that you'll have to create specifically for the one fund and then something different for another. So the time that it takes to build a relationship is really worthwhile time, because it means that you have a greater chance of success. I am encouraged, though, by the fact that as funders, we are talking to one another more than we ever have before. And I see this both, federal programs talking to one another when they haven't, but also, I work in Ontario, and I met Chantal through some of the outreach work and the sort of interlayered connectivity of what this program does and how it intersects with another one. And we should talk to one another, because that will actually further the impact, create a better result, which of course is something that's always important. But then how does it become sustainable? How does it actually benefit and grow beyond, what was the original idea? Because so often, it's a project and then it comes and goes. We're looking at increasingly how it is that we can support things which will really be beneficial on multiple layers, and not just related to culture, not just about art. It's about healthy communities. It's about the ability to learn and to grow, and where education intersects with just cultural knowledge. I'm going on a bit too long, but what strikes me is that so often the relationship seems to be one of, it's like you're making an appointment with a bank manager, and you've come to make a case in order to get a loan. Yeah. I would say that that's not the dynamic anymore. That's an old-fashioned dynamic, which it needs to be put aside. Be brave. Don't be afraid, because we're actually here to help you. We're going to serve your interests.
Yeah, and I want to echo that, because like you say, we talk among ourselves between funders, but we're also connectors. I mean, a lot of the people that contact me to have information about different grants that the provincial government have or how they could fund their event, I might not have anything in my portfolio of grants, but I might be able to refer them to David. I might be able to refer them to someone at the Ontario Arts Council, at Ontario Creates. So, get to know a few people in each of the key areas that you will be working with, and tap that information, tap the resources from these people. I just wanted to come back to something that Avril said that I thought was really interesting. You said something about, basically summarizing what you said you looked at the art as a business instead of looking only as art. So what you said to me was interesting, because oftentimes I hear people are looking at funding for their creative project when there is also other kind of funding for businesses. And I want to come back to this, because oftentimes when people come to me for connection, I send them to the Ministry of Agriculture. They can't believe that I'm sending them there, but there's maybe a grant that would be good for their organization. So I want to hear you guys a bit on that, looking at the business aspect rather than just the art aspect. Anybody wants to pick that one up?
Yeah, I can. I mean, so the reason I was going through the thought process that individuals and organizations sort of embark on when they're thinking about funding is because when they're defining their identity and they're confronted with questions like, what's your governance status? Like, are you incorporated? You know, who's your membership, or what kind of art are you doing? Or all these kind of things that are questions about the identity of the individual or the organization. I thought the important thing about that is that it doesn't necessarily align with sectoral approaches, like with funders' approaches to what funding should be. And it often means that people become, people make a case for their funding from a very personal place, right? Most people, when they come to me and need some kind of funding, will say like, hey, I'm doing this because and their reasons are around how wonderful the artistic rationale for their project is. Like, I need this funding because I'm going to do this, this and this and this. And most often, that's only less than 50% of what a funder needs to hear. They need to hear other things that are related to the organization, to its position within the community, to its partnerships, to its own development, all these other kind of organizational, operational details. And a lot of artists, when they're just starting out with funding, are really just focused on, I have this amazing idea. And they're right. They're absolutely right. But, funding starts from a very different place. It starts from a perspective often of what we need to do to position this artist and this project within a larger context. So, yeah.
Did you want to say anything, Monica?
Yeah, I love that you asked that question, because I really, truly, strongly believe in diversifying your funds right now, especially with everything going on. We're seeing the government tapped out on giving for so many different ways. Just the amount of help that so many different communities and organizations need right now. So following back to actually what David and Avril said, just when you're having to ask for money, it's not something that you should feel guilty about. It's not a transactional relationship with someone who's funding you. So often it's a relationship that's formed because they believe in what you're trying to do, because the arts are always here to serve a community and better the life of the people living in that community. So you should never feel guilty when you're pitching to someone on why they should help fund your project. And even if you're not pitching for money directly, you can pitch to like the social media accounts that I mentioned earlier. Like, I'll share my screen once more really quick just to show off something that Curiosity did. It was featuring an artist who reached out to them and then wanted to focus on masks. So the artist was Wallflower. It's quite a small Instagram following. You can see there's only 1,600 followers, and they reached out to Curiosity and got a huge feature for a contest to be given out masks. So it was something that BlogTO could create a contest and get more followers, but it was also a win for Wallflower as well, because that was exposed to all of BlogTO's followers. So I'm just thinking outside the box like that. If you're hurting for funding and you're not able to have, and you're someone who's not a nonprofit and you can't go to the government for funding for something like that, but just kind of looking at different ways like that and keeping your ear to the ground, I would say just stay engaged and don't just like posts, but always reach out, do a comment, do something. And if it's overwhelming for you, bring in other people from your organization. If you're a nonprofit, reach out to your board, or just ask and poll interest and see if there's someone in your audience already who's truly invested in you and has some expertise in any of those areas where you're looking to build, because it helps relieve stress from you and your staff and your existing volunteers already, but also helps you strengthen relationships and form new relationships in the process as well.
I'd like to ask you guys, how do you think a rural artist or a rural organization, for example, because I assume a lot of the people in the conference are from the Simcoe County area, how would they stand out from the pack when they apply for a grant? What could they do? What should they do to stand out? David, you're on mute.
I can go first if you like. I think one of the ways that you can stand out is we often ask ourselves the question, where do the gaps lie in terms of what we are already supporting? So each program that I know in Canadian Heritage, they sort of have a map that will look at a region. And honestly, if this is good news, I would say, for all of you, is that your region is underrepresented within the clientele base that we have for most of our programs. There's some existing festivals, there are some theaters, but there could be more. So it is important to get a sense of, okay, where are the gaps? What is Heritage looking for? And you can emphasize that. I also think, too, that, in this moment where we're looking at how to respond to sort of top-level society trends, how you can respond to that. Are you a settler organization that is next to a First Nation? What's the nature of your relationship with that community? How can you, within your project, within what you're planning to do, build a link, do more community development? It's those kinds of things that are often, and it takes time. This is not something you can rush. And, it's both your responsibility to build a relationship within your community, but it's also part of what will then allow us to support you and to figure out how, what other ways can you approach this? What are the different strategies you can develop?
Okay. Anyone else wants to pick up that thread, or?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing that I spoke to earlier, which is knowing your context and knowing your context thoroughly. And I think it's very evident to funders when things are thrown together. Like if I were identifying that burden of expertise, like everybody just having to know everything very deeply in order to be good at this, in order to get funding as a obstacle to funding, then, the next thing I would say is that the structural requirements of funding are also there, and the pace of funding is also there. And so, knowing that if you are going to develop a project that's going to involve partners from other areas, and then you all of a sudden decide 2 weeks before the deadline to do that, it's evident to a funder. It's really evident. And it's insulting to communities who find themselves accessed or tapped for partnership agreements right before a deadline. I hear that all the time. So, it really does take a long development process to put something together. And I think that people don't understand that, the payoff is worth it, because it represents a freedom, project funding to, that takes 6 months to put together and 26 weeks to hear about, represents a bunch of freedom for yourself and your organization to do something that, when it's properly conceived, doesn't really limit you or misrepresent you. It gives you something to work with that you can build on. And, Monica will tell you, and I'll tell you the same thing, that having to define other sources of revenue for a project that come from private and earned revenue streams as opposed to funding streams, that's onerous. Again, when you're throwing something together at the last minute, But if you're putting goals together for a long-term project, that's a best way to make relationships. It's like, look, I need a partner on this. We're going to do this, this, and this. What's that going to mean for us? What's that going to mean for you? It forces you to explore things from a 360-degree kind of vantage. That's really important. And so, funding itself can be a really important project building, strategic objectives building exercise.
I have one thing. You just said the word important a couple of times. And what I want to say is that you are important. Your projects, your communities are important to us. And I think especially within the federal jurisdiction, we support a lot of organizations in large urban centers, and rural and remote is underrepresented. So you're super important to us, actually. And that's an important dynamic in our relationship with you.
As someone who also analyzed a lot of grants proposal, we talked about building a relationship with an agent, but also don't hesitate before you're going to apply, not just the day before, but like a week or two before, to contact us, to just pass your idea to us. It takes hours to fill out an application form, and I can't tell you the number of times where I get an application form that they obviously didn't talk to any agent because it does not meet the objectives of the program, and we can't rank that. We cannot give it points if it's not even meeting the objectives of the program, or some of the basic information that is required is not part of the application. And unfortunately, that's going to sunk a project. And that could have been avoided entirely if there would have been at least a small discussion with an agent. So I always tell people, just give us a call, pitch the project, give us an idea what you're trying to do, and then we'll be able to guide you to see where it works, what doesn't work, so that you're not wasting all this time. The other thing that no funding organization wants is surprises. So not only build your relationship, but once you've got funding, if you get the funding, please keep us appraised of what's happening with your project. If there's major changes in your project, if you can't go ahead with certain portion of your project, if you're having overruns of funding, anything like that, this is information that your agent will want to know. Because when you build a relationship where there's no surprise, where you're delivering on time, you build goodwill for the future application you will have. So always keep that in mind.
Absolutely. I love that you said that as well, Chantal, because even for sponsorships, just checking in with them rather than just at the end when you're saying, hey, I'd like my sponsorship check, it feels so impersonable. And it's one of the worst things you can do. If you're someone who's more open to it, like you said earlier, bringing them in as a stakeholder, because your sponsor is inevitably part of your audience as well. Or if you're in that early phase and you're trying to figure out what makes you unique, I'd recommend looking at the audience you serve, because that's directly your ROI, or return on investment, for those sponsors who are looking to work with you. If you are using social media, it's incredibly easy. You can just ask polls and stuff in Instagram, see who engages with your posts, and it generates reports for you. Or if you have email lists, that's another way you can look and see. And definitely, if you're on different platforms, check those different platforms, because you'll have different audience on each of them as well, which sounds like it could be more work, but you never know what type of sponsor is looking for what type of audience. Or when you're looking for who you serve, you never know, like you could serve an incredibly niche community, and that's something who a sponsor or the government might be looking to work with in one of their grants or one of their sponsorship proposals as well. And definitely also when you're looking at yourself and trying to figure out what makes you unique, if you feel overwhelmed, start by your mandate at your organization or you as an artist, and then look at the mission of what your program is or what this project is, and then look for sponsors who share like mandates and missions with you, and focus on that and go from there. And mention, hey, I'd like to work with you on this. I wonder if it's something you're interested in. And that lets you start forming that relationship early and bring them in as a stakeholder, and then keep them engaged, keep checking in with them, and they'll see you as someone who they could likely see working together with in the future as well.
I like that we're talking a lot about partnership, because I think this is really the way to go. I see partnership between organizations, but also in a way natural relationships between sectors, like culture and tourism, for example, go hand in hand. And in our ministry, we might not have as much funding in culture, but we have a lot of funding in tourism. And when I have people asking me that question, I tell them, but especially in Simcoe County, we have so much tourism that we have to be able to leverage, and that so that more people go to museums that are visiting the region, more people go to see performance, more people go to galleries, and we have that ability, so that capacity to make those connections is also very important. And do you have any idea of what best way or maybe where someone could go to build their fundraising muscles, to learn a bit more about how to do that? I think someone might have put some information on the chat. By the way, there's a few, if you haven't checked the chat, just look at the, just put your mouse on the screen and you'll see there's a chat. I have a couple people here who've already put information. Amongst others, Carmen, our friend from Ontario Trillium Foundation, has put information about her grant there.
She's on fire.
Yeah.
And there's a few, I don't know who put the information, from Imagine Canada and Charity Village, and Canada Helps, but these are also good places to go. Anybody else has any idea of maybe how you can build that fundraising muscle?
You have to, like I said earlier, if you're a nonprofit and you have a board and they're looking on how to get engaged, reach out to them. Just ask and see if they want to be engaged, or if you're an individual artist, it's looking for someone else who might be doing similar projects as to you, and see how you can partner up with them. And just like Carmen said earlier, fundraising before fundraising. So looking out for those genuine relationships that you can connect with and then place on a platform and showcase later on.
I see in the chat someone's asking what organizations are David and Chantal with. So I'm with the Department of Canadian Heritage, and I work in the Ontario region. And what I was going to suggest is one way you can build up that sort of knowledge base, build relationships and fundraising muscle, is by attending events that are put on by organizations like yours, Monica. You know, they offer webinars, they bring in experts to talk about the process, to demystify things, to, you know, create resources. And there are many organizations that provide these kinds of services. So depending on what your project is and what aspect of the cultural sector you're working in, for certain, there are opportunities. So often on right now, there seems to be more opportunity now than there's ever been before because of COVID. People are much, I think, amenable to the idea of reaching out and talking to one another. And the beautiful thing about that is that it's also, you know, unless there's a broadband issue and you have trouble actually logging in or staying on a Zoom call, which I know many rural organizations do face that as a challenge. And nonetheless, you are able to connect with people all across Canada and internationally too, depending on the circumstance. And it's certainly a rich sort of vista out there.
Yeah, that's great. I see the same thing, especially now. A lot of organizations are putting up a lot of webinars or information sessions, a lot of which sometimes is free. So there's a lot of information out there for people to have. We have about a couple more minutes, but I was wondering if you see any specific trends in terms of sponsorships, if it's different versus the cities versus what's done in a rural area. I know, Monica, you work on that specifically. I am not an expert of sponsorship, but I get the feeling it's a bit harder in the region. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was working in Sudbury and Thunder Bay, and North Bay as well, I always heard the dilemma of the hockey problem when you're competing for funders in town. And that goes back to looking at who you're serving as well, and just the diverse audience that comes out for the arts, because that's the beauty of it, is just our wide range of audience. I mean, I call me a bad Canadian. I just never have been that into hockey. I don't know. But that's the thing, that when you look, the audience for hockey is often so different than the audience that you're reaching as an arts organization. And yeah, absolutely. So many organizations are looking to sponsor and fund initiatives that serve that arts community and those stakeholders at arts organizations as well. Like, I know in the times of COVID, I work with a lot of sponsorships and focus on specifically this year what sponsorships were formed within Toronto only. But what I saw commonly is a lot of sponsorships within tech and media companies were still existing, as well as print sponsors as well, who do a lot for advertising. And then beyond all else, the banks will always have money, and the banks will always be looking at how they can serve communities, especially diverse communities at that. So those are definitely the places you should start. Any bank at all. I know a lot of organizations have mentioned that they don't approach a certain bank because they bank with another institute. But if you're serving an audience that Scotiabank is looking to reach and you bank with TD, still go reach out and approach Scotiabank. What do you have to lose if they want to connect with that audience? And I have seen some like that come in where it's a certain organization working with Bank A, but they have a sponsorship from Bank B because Bank B has the initiative to reach that audience.
I think that one of the reasons I was specifically asking this question is that I find sometimes when you're trying to apply for a sponsor, you might go to your bank in your branch in Midland, and then they'll tell you, no, that has to go to head office in Toronto. And I think that what happens is that it deflates a bit people from asking for funding because they tell themselves, oh yeah, okay, head office in Toronto, they're not even going to look at it. But what you're telling us is that that's not the case.
Yeah, especially because so many institutes are looking to serve those more rural communities. A lot of the time, if you're mentioning that in the initiative of their mandate and mentioning and focusing on who you serve, if you're serving youth, if you're serving BIPOC, if you're serving Native and Indigenous communities, amplify that and showcase it. And like I said before, ROI, track your social media, see what other organizations and what users are interacting with you in a positive way. Not an insidious way at all. Instagram has a fantastic method where you can poll your audience and say, hey, what are you looking for from us? Or tell us a bit about yourself. Like, how did you find out about us? Who are you? Just even when you're not doing that, I would say engage with them as well. Just ask them questions about what they like to see, or especially in times of COVID, if you're a performing arts organization who can't currently hold those performances, ask your audience about a favorite memory of a performance or something personable like that.
That's good. That's great. I see that our chat is heated right now. There's a Carmen from OTF has been putting a lot of information. Yes, the government of Ontario has just got a budget last week, and there's a new fund called the Community Building Fund that will be out there to try to finance all kinds of things, including culture. We don't have a lot of details right now, but it will be administered through the OTF over 2 years. We're coming out to the end right now of our panel discussion. So I'd like to, again, acknowledge with gratitude the sponsors of this conference. For this evening, our sponsors are the Midland Public Library and Grant Thornton. We would also like to express our gratitude to Simcoe County Tourism for their sponsorship of the conference and Rogers TV for their technical support.